Welcome to Sahitya Academy's Webline Literature series, and today's program is in English language. Today's program is poetry reading by three very eminent poets, and all the poets are joining us today from Delhi. And this poetry reading program was launched by Sahitya Academy about 4 to 4.5 decades ago. Why? One is that poems themselves, the writing a poem or reading a poem from a book gives a different feeling when one listens to the poem. It's poetry reading and poetry listening. Poetry by itself is essentially it's oral in nature. Now, that poetry listening has been on the decline. Huffington Post and other rating agencies in US and UK and everywhere, they organized a global research on poetry listening in 2015. Between 2010 and 2015, what was essentially a land of poetry, like places like India, Indian subcontinent as such, the poetry reading and poetry listening is on the decline. To address this issue and many more, to give the pleasure of the viewers to listen directly from the lips of the poet, we launched this program. And we have been very successful in all the 24 languages. Apart from 24 languages recognized by Sahitya Academy, we also have been organizing poetry reading programs in tribal and oral traditions. So we will not take any more further time, and we are joined by Professor Nandini Sahu. She is an internationally acclaimed poet and creative writer. She has been widely published in US, UK, Africa, and Pakistan. She's the author and editor of 13 books, and her 14th book will be somewhere in fall 2020. She is a recipient of numerous literary awards, including gold medal from the Vice President of India for her contributions to English studies in India. Presently, she is the Director, School of Foreign Languages and Professor of English at Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Her areas of research interest, research and interest cover Indian literature, new literatures, folklore, culture studies, American literature, children's literature, and critical theory. Welcome to the show, Professor Nandini. It's our great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah. Our next point is Mr. Mukul Kumar. Mr. Mukul Kumar is a bureaucrat, novelist, and poet. He belongs to the 1997 batch of civil services and Indian Railway Traffic Service officer. He is at present working in New Delhi. He has been honored with the National Award for Outstanding Service to Indian Railways. His published books include 2 novels, As Boys Become Men, published in 2016, and Seduction by Truth in 2018, and 2 poetry collections, The Irrepressible Echoes and recently published Catharsis. And it's great to have you here, Mr. Mukul Kumar.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our third poet of the day is Neha Bansal. She is a very, very promising young poet, and she belongs to the 2010 batch of Indian Administrative Service. And she feels that, we will come to that end, what her poems reflect. And her poems have been published widely. And it's wonderful to have you, Miss Neha, with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we will start with the poetry reading now. Professor Nandini Sahu. Yeah, please read.
Thank you, Dr. Rajmohan.
Read the title of the poem, followed by the poem poetry. Yeah.
Yes, I'll do that. So it's a very prestigious platform. Thank you very much for inviting me for this poetry reading session. I write poetry as an emotional engagement, and fairy tales and mythology, they have been the influential factors of my poetry. I write basically witness literature, which is poetry for social change, social mobility literature I write. And also I write stories in verse. Each poem I write has a story behind it. Almost all the poems are story based. For example, one of my poems, the title of the poem is Aside. This is Shakespearean stagecraft I have taken, Aside. I will read the poem now. In the morning, I am a daughter-in-law, serving hot tea, stitching broken bottoms, cleaning, cooking, frying, stirring, wiping my son's nose. Sometimes the ever complaining man watches me. I'm a wife. In the day, I am a college teacher facing young, obsessed girls and boys, trying hard to look professional, wearing the mask of an official fool. Again, in the afternoon, I am a mother, loving, kissing, playing, caring, rearing the daily saga of phone bills, market prices, taxes, policies, news bulletins, chiding the maid for chopping the vegetables rather small. In the evening, I am a showpiece, a perfect business, but bargaining, wearing a matching lipstick, thinking of the evening menu, relishing and inexpensive, ever smiling behind a mysterious face, knowing every detail of mornings, afternoons, never ending nights. Yes,
Yeah,
in the
that's it.
till he smiles proud and sleeps, and then I drag the world to my feet, a dreamer that I am. I reach the unreached, swim in the oh no world of fancy, quench my feminine thirst, dry my hungry limbs. I am every woman, dripping, pouring desire into my feminine self. In the morning, I am a daughter in law, wife, mother, researcher again, mute, content. I am the goddess who knows what are the things to happen and what not, since time has plowed scars on my virgin mud.
Yeah. Thank you, Chad. Mr. Mukul, please go ahead.
Yeah. Coming to why I write poetry, I do believe that any art, any form of creativity is a matter of compulsion. And coming to poetry, poetry has been defined as the spontaneous overflow of the powerful feelings. And I do believe, because I lived these moments so intensely, and I can feel it so palpably, that I feel that you can't remain quiet without giving vent to the emotions which grip you. And here I would like to quote Robert Frost, who says poetry is when emotions have found thoughts and thoughts have found words. That is this is the process which a poet really lives. And thanks to Sahitya Academy for giving me this opportunity, because this has come at at a very right time, because my new poetry collection has been published, which is called Catharsis. And probably the title also explains what I was trying to, convey what poetry is. Now I will read my first poem, which is titled Dahlia of 45. Here, this poem shows the love for the nature, love of how intensely poet is in love with the nature. On the other hand, towards the end, this poem tries to establish some sort of resonance between nature and the emotions of the poet. So here goes the poem. Nature never comes to me in surfeit. Even a transient, tranquil stare at a flower, a croton, or a creeper comes to me as a wondrous treat. As the spectacles that meet my eyes and the actions that find my hands, day in and day out, threaten me with a sense of hubbub and humdrum. Nature promises an instant wonder, the surreal immanent in the real, the prodigious in the prosaic, affording a costless access to the soul as it enters the wearied eyes. Hence the winter breakfast in my lawns, wallowing in the wrap of the warm sun. It has told me the life cycle of dahlias to loosen flames from its spawns. But a morning affects my gaze, cast upon a dahlia, discolored, its petals wrinkled into a gloomy mass. A sigh escapes. Ah, not long it will last. The vision shifts from youth to infirmity, and my eyes gravitate to a senile dahlia. This is just about to part with the tree, instilling a curious melancholy. My gaze turns frantic, sweeping along the row of the flowers, myriad and motley, searching for the one that perfectly pairs with a man of 45. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Both the poems are really good. So, Miss Neha?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. Unlike the other two illustrious poets, my poetry is not published. So far, I've been only collecting, trying to write, trying to break the lazy schedules, and trying to collect some 50 odd poems to get it published. Um, it was very nice to hear both your poetry, ma'am and sir. They were wonderful indeed. My poetry is about, like ma'am, it is about giving voice to the voiceless. It has a lot of, generally, I like to write about mythological characters who have not been given a voice in the mythology. For example, Ahilya or Hidimba. So I'll be sharing certain poems with you. This particular poem, which I'm going to start with, is it's about the modern predicament of man. This is based on a real event, though I've changed the circumstance. So I'll begin with the poem. Um, it's called outing with girlfriends. An outing with girlfriends. On a cold wintry night, sipping the Starbucks latte, we drove around the city, discussing the leitmotifs in a director's cut we had watched that evening, on reclining seats with ottomans and warm blankets to cover our feet. In Jimmy Choo heels, clutching Louis Vuitton bags, we planned for fancier cars and holidays in provincial France, bitched about indolent maids and the meddlesome in-laws, ranted about the wearisome life in general and the overbearing bosses in particular, made fuss about Sabya Sachi ensemble for the friend's destination wedding next year. We cursed the government that wasted taxpayers' money copiously and the uncouth people at large. Sorry. For spitting and pissing all over the city. The harangue went on about the myriad discomforts of her life, till the time we saw her, the one with the vacant eyes. She stood on the sidewalk, her clothes tattered and torn, her hair a lifeless brown and shorn, her youthful body contrasting with an ancient stoic face. Silent now in snail-paced traffic, we soberly passed by her and saw her survey the footpath to rest her weary bones under the cold street light. Thank you.
Professor Nandini.
Yeah. So sometimes I write poetry on the existential issues of life. Now I'll read two very short poems, which I wrote during the last few days of my father. The title of one short poem is Food. That food for my Baba. That food has worked on thorns all through the day for you. That food which has shown you footsteps to follow. That foot behind the orange sun has walked through the arches barefoot, on fire, on water, near the parapets, has cracked doors and windows for you to enter life, to enter safe. That foot has walked, crossed the never-ending roads when you aspired for the colossal. That foot, your passport to utopia, to dream of new truths, passport to planets uncharted. That foot is walking away, weak, parting with Fantasia forever. Will you join? And the other very short poem is Who Says Death is the Only Truth? The title of the poem, Who Says Death is the Only Truth? Death stands at a distance, all day, all night, smiling, unblinking, like that picture under the staircase. Are you waiting for the last bus? Do you know the sands are slowly rolling through the gaps of your fingers? Tighten your fist. You are obliged, enlightened to pick one, the coffin or a life of action. From one birth to another, augment the civilization. Does your laugh tear your shrunken lips? open your wardrobe, cover the breast of the poor, apply on your lips the balm of a millennium's rebellion. Who says death is the only truth? See, your body of fog is still seated on the throne. You still shine on the firmament of stars. That was my father.
Yeah, good, good, very good. Professor, Mr. Mukul?
Yeah. Uh, my next poem is Idol. And here I would like to state that a considerable portion, amount of my poetry emerges from the actual sights and my immediate surroundings. And this poem, Idol, has also come out of that experience. A chance, a chance glance at an idol. And it brings out the contrast between here I am trying to idolize the idol vis-a-vis the higher level of comprehension when a person is able to conceive or perceive divinity in his own mind without, and he doesn't require assistance of any idol. And how useful it is to a common man who is caught up in the hustle and bustle of living. A chance glance idol. A chance glance at the idol, set towering in the park, my car passes by, instantly severs me from my surround and causes a curious connection with my loved deity. Stirrings first and soulful sensations sweeping over the whole being no second, as if the bright sun setting a frozen lake into a resplendent ripple, or opening a morose dahlia bud into a bright, beaming blossom. O Lord, oblivious to you I had been so long, and plunged myself into insentience prolonged. The tide of remorse trips the trajectory of thrill. The tide of remorse trips the trajectory of thrill, but no later gushes in the wonder. A lifeless idol had this potent a power. I am not a sage. I am not a sage nor a philosopher who can comprehend the eternity in the mind. Rather a simpleton I am who rejoices. Idol is such a magical escort into eternity. Thank you.
Miss Neha?
Yes, my next poem is Ahalya. Why does her husband feel different tonight? With passions galore, the stony gaze has given away to the roving admiration. The embrace is warm and comforting, as sitting by a bonfire. The silken eager touch, so different from the ennui of a bored lover. The sweet nothings he whispers tonight are nothing like the hitherto silent rituals. Who then stands at the door with ashen face when he loves her so? The fury of the rishi knew no bounds as he eyed both. With the defiled wife, while the defiled wife cringed with horror, her beguiler tried to flee. Covering her nakedness, Ahalya stammered to explain, silenced as she turned to stone and cursed to remain so. Summers baked, winters froze, and the rains washed her rigid self as she stood rooted to the very same spot. Who did her greater harm? Who did her greater harm? Her stony self wondered. Was it the shapeshifter who gave her the night of bliss? Or her lord of many wedded years, whose rage made her still? Thank you.
Professor Nandini?
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed the beautiful poems by my fellow poets. Now, the next poem I'll be reading, the title of the poem is Puri Beach. Well, I'm from Odisha, though I'm living in Delhi since last 14 years. But my Odia background and the landscape of Odisha, these things keep appearing in my poetry. So Puri Sea Beach, the poem is about that. The title, Puri Beach. Lured by silky sheets of sunlight clouds, after days of heat, nights of humid, meandering climate, she flaunted her cold waves, the sapphire Bay of Bengal, throwing tantrums of a Cancerian woman, overwhelmed, enamored, I relaxed for some time in October Puri Beach, where darkness died, quiet prevailed. Here, cold wind rebuffs the clutter, wind and air hum with the consummation of love, that here we are equal, the colored and the fair, neutrally in words and spirit. Here, history creates chapters new, and he, Lord Jagannath, smiles all the while with wide open eyes. He is the Lord of humanity, Lord Jagannath, our steering principle, our vision to see each day a rollicking, fresh century. The groan of the unfortunate, the poor, suffering soul, rend the skies with reverberation of waves, pull down the pillars of paradise in the chanting of mantras in his temple, in the midst of music of drum, of dhol. The Lord of man cannot afford to sleep, round eyes, large and open. He goes through birth after birth. He is reborn in you, me, him, her. We all glide in the ocean of love, pious adoration, aspiring to lull in his open arms forever, resting in Puri Beach, where love and compassion grow, glow, reflect, refract, turn into multitude of rainbow worlds. Here is the sea and the sand. They invite. Sunbeams descend the daydreams, ripping the speared out canvas of the sky like breaths. Pretty damsels dance, and music, food, chat, gupchup, colors, merry-go-rounds, honeymooners, balloon kids, lovely men and beautiful women, white memes, dazzling smiles, their dresses bright, the viewers' delight, the snake charmers, the puppet shows, the full-bodied fisherwoman drying salted fish, eyes fixed on the horizon, her man seems a dot fishing afar, singing a love song, invite. Hidden bubbles, adult lusty foam, invite. Life breathes. In October, Puri Beach, darkness dies, white prevails amid silky sheets of sunlight clouds in Puri Beach.
Thank you. That was an entirely different take. Last year, we had a pleasure of listening to a woman poet. She is from North India, but she gets caught up every time in Puri only when it's during the cyclone, twice in a year, season after season, year after year. How the fury and the fear of it evokes the Puri beach. Thank you. Mr. Mukul?
Yeah, I'm getting to listen to some lovely poetry by my fellow participants. This poem which I'm going to recite is very dear to my heart. It is titled The Beggar. It became quite popular and it was published in the International Library of Poetry in the United States also. And it tries to, it is a very subtle commentary upon the lack of compassion in society. The beggar. A beggar, limbless, armless, the fragments barely clad, the begging ball, tied to the loose end of one arm, rolls over the pathway along the garment shops, and stomachs out some cacophonous score which is getting drowned into the clatter of stones raining into his empty bowl. And another short poem I would recite. It is again, I think it has again emerged from the actual side. And it is a subtle commentary upon like what you can say, like a greed and insatiable, urge for this materialistic goods in the society. And how a real image can give you such surreal experiences, this poem tries to bring out. The street acrobat. He crawls upon hands, upside down, his hand shaking with name and shame, his inverted intestines coil around his head and steady it in balance. Blind to the audience, He crawls meticulously, even quite a while hence, he finds that he is crawling only over the concrete and no currency. In not long, he watches a horde of intestines furiously leaping out from the undifferentiated bodies which flog him back upon his feet. Thank you.
Okay. That Beggar poem, actually, we had that reminds me of 2018. We invited a Jewish poet. She is from Tel Aviv, and she was enamored by the beggars of India. They are very different from beggars anywhere in the world. And she wrote a poem on that, and in the end, she ended the poem with the sent line that they own the world. The world doesn't care for them, but they own the world. And also, I mean, your take reminds me of William Donkin's The Wayfarers. The man, he came to India from England, and then, well, okay, he was smitten by Meher Baba, his philosophy and all that, but he ended up compiling some remarkable compilations of beggars anywhere in the world. Well, anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. Such a wonderful poems. Ms. Neha.
Yeah, this poem is about Yashoda. This poem is deeply personal because sometimes when mother complains that I don't call her enough, I don't take her call enough. And now I'm a mother of an 8-year-old boy. So perhaps, over a period of time, one day my son had to go to his grandparents' home and he was there for a month. He was stuck there for a month. So I realized the pangs of motherhood now. And I realized what my mother must be going through when I don't call her up enough, when I don't take her call. I tell her, I have too much of work, please don't call me. So this poem was basically written in her honor. Yashoda, won't you turn back and look, Kana, and see her tear-stained face, and the eyes that stonily stare at the dimming sight of your caravan? Won't you see those quivering lips moving silently to bless you for eternity? Would you forget the touch of her scalded fingers that broke for you the hot bread into tiny morsels, and the sound of her jingling bangles as she churned out the frothy butter, the scent of her jasmine-bound hair you inhaled as she spun out fairy tales, the warmth of a hug on those moonless nights when the spooky monsters chill your spine, and the pearly white smile that grew bigger at your every big and small achievement. The courtyard chase in mock anger at the butter thefts and the neighborhood clamor, and the midnight spying by the omniscient mother as you stole away to sing and dance with Radha. Would you not think of her as you fulfill your glorious destiny? Would you not think of her as you slay Kans and guide Pandavas on the chessboard of the tumultuous lives? Would you not think of her as you take 16,008 wives and prevent disrobing of Draupadi? Would you not think of her as you become the Narayana and come to be known as the incarnation of Vishnu? Would you not think of her as you herd your tribe to the resplendent city of Dwarka and when you lay dying with an arrow stuck in your heel? Thank you.
Professor Nandini.
Yeah, thank you. So, her reading of so many mythological poems actually tempts me to read a small part from this book, Sita. This is one of my poetry collections, and it's a complete poem. It's a long poem in 25 cantos. One long poem where I have reconstructed the character Sita from the Ramayana, and I have placed her vis-a-vis as contemporary women. The progressive, independent, optimistic Sita who doesn't brood or complain about life, rather who accepts whatever comes to her as a single mother, as an eco-feminist, as someone contributing to life and society. So my Sita is basically an eco-feministic Sita, and I will read a small part from the Canto 24. Sita defines herself like this: I am Prakriti, born and fading into Mother Nature. I am Shakti, phenomenal destroyer of Ravan. I am grace. I stand for mercy, bounty, and redemption. I am the ultimate woman, the glorious mother of love Kush. I am nature. I have inestimable moods, innumerable appearances on earth. I am splendor. I transcend the crimson womanly. I am pure bliss. I fly free. I am innocence, born naked from the furrow. I am a teardrop. I stand for morning mortality. I am a bird grasped and fluttered to withdrawn regions. I am a memory sweltering and reverberating. Time is joyous with simmering intimations. I am growth. I burn in the flame of the fire ordeal. I am death. I overpower Ravan. I eclipse evil. I am immaculate. I have the attitude for the tide of sovereignty. I am mighty. My power lies in ultimate motherhood. I am divine. My love and grace redeem the universe. So this is a part of the long poem, Sita. The 25 cantos that describe the story of Sita reconstructing the character. Thank you.
Mr. Mukul Kumar.
Yeah. Now let me change, the flavor of which it is a love poem which I am going to recite. It is titled "It Is You." It begins with, telling the readers the intensity of love. To be precise, imperialistic sway of love, how you are ruled by the emotions about a particular thoughts and emotions about a particular person. But it ends up, interestingly, showing how hatred denotes the climax of love. When you were here, you were with me. Now you are gone, you are within me. Separation effects such a confluence. My senses have transcended my body to sense another self. It is you. My consciousness is laid dissociated, sculpting an image with my emotions coloring it. It is you. I see what you saw. I utter what you uttered. My silences reverberate with your sounds. I'm surrounded with the multiple images which constitute one being. It is you. Suddenly I feel tormented in letting another self rule mine, with my world all besieged, all that was mine not remaining mine, fills in hatred for the ruler. It is you. But it's not long before a glorious epiphany transfigures me with a sublime tenderness, whispering, finest love shows up in hatred only. Thank you.
Very good.
Beautiful.
Neha.
I am also trying to change the mood. This is a humorous poem called Arranged Marriage the Old-Fashioned Way. I'll begin with the poem. He went there with his 5 aunts and 3 brothers-in-law. The Banarsi-clad aunts spoke a lot, the co-brothers a little, and the groom not at all. He sat there almost broodingly, the branch manager of a Sarkari bank, with your average Indian mustaches. Kachoris with tangy tamarind chutney from the back street Nathu Halwai served, whose laurels, along with Bua's cross-stitch tablecloth, shamelessly ascribed to the bride. The aunts nodded approval when she brought forth the tea tray, with bowed head and bashful eyes, tutored by her omniscient Mossy. Gulping down the elaichi tea and eyeing her surreptitiously, the groom quickly noticed her basin-cured complexion, her long, sneaky braid, pliant yet promisingly passionate. No questions were asked about bride's aspirations. Topic of dowry hushed up, but traditions were to be respected. Leave-taking now, the groom afforded a lingering glance on his bride-to-be, definitely not lost on chuckling aunts and the beaming parents of the bride. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Nandini,
Yeah, nice poem. So let me also go for a change of mood. A very short poem. Just I will take less than 1 minute maybe to read this poem of poetry. What according to me is poetry? Poetry, the title. The gentle art of looking through a concrete experience of the abstract, the union of life and peace, the vision and the visionless taken together, the song and silence, the turnings where all the rivers flow, amid the heart's dark flow, a rapport with mortality, a formula of sight, a clarity of light, a sign of the heart, a look into the night, a day that is bright. What else is poetry but a clear insight?
yeah, thank you. Mr. Mukul?
If time permits, I will race through a long poem. It is quite an interesting poem. It actually shows the conflict between the bureaucrat and the poet on the one hand, and between the novelist and the poet at another plane. I will try to race through it, but it's quite an interesting, poem. It is based on the actual experience. I'm invited to recite the poetry I wrote in the recent times at the All India Writers Meet. It's long since I have written any. I feel enthused to write one for the occasion. I come back home from office in the evening and hurry my way into the bed, hankering for the solitude. I switch off the light to illuminate the poet within, but it's to no avail. I try harder and harder, but the poet doesn't rise. I'm frustrated. My inner self wails. Earlier, I swiftly juggled the poet and the bureaucrat. Why is it not happening tonight? The night is rendered wakeful and time a harrowing, nebulous mass. Lastly, the poet pities me and pronounces, why did you leave me unvisited for so long? You ignored my knocks at your heart, and now see the bureaucrat got all the time to cement his sheath upon me. Don't you know that the bureaucrat and the poet are as apart as the Antarctica from the architect? The poet continues its reproach. I am a creature with a surging heart, an untamed mind, a spontaneous consciousness, and free lips. I recollect in tranquility the overflowing feelings in its widest spectrum, and tell them to the world with an echoing symphony. This particular stanza brings out the definition of poetry, basically. Now, how it is contrasted with the, the bureaucrat in the next stanza. And you are a bureaucrat who is a monochromatic monolith with a draped heart, a molded mind, a cultivated consciousness, and tailored lips, who is trained in the art of stoicism and status quo, and doesn't allow any overflow of the feelings, capping them in measure and hue, and telling them to the world with a calculated confidentiality. Not only did you not visit me, but abandoned me in the forlorn, as if an expired currency for the other yawners, for men and matter. This is how poetry losing its popularity, and fiction, because I am a fiction writer also, I can make out that how fiction is becoming more and more popular as a yawner. Tonight I am not gifting you this last stanza. I would like to draw your attention. Tonight I am not gifting you a poem. Instead, handing over to you this dirge to be sung to the world, to rescue poetry, the art of squeezing the sea in the saucer, the universe in an urn, which is the power divine, wielded with the serene soul, seething sensibility, sizzling sentiments, wondrous words, magical metaphors, and resonating rhymes. Applause you may amass by singing the dirge, and thus may return to poetry, the drifting poets who are the brightest reflections of divinity on this earth. Thank you.
Miss Neha, last poem.
Yeah, sure. I was born in Haryana, so we have this problem of female infanticide, female feticide. So this very small poem on that. We are also famous for celebrating the Ashtami. So it's about that. The poem is titled Devi. It was Chaitra Ashtami, and he called the little goddesses home, washed their feet, served their meals, and considered himself lucky on accomplishing yet again the biannual feat. He praised Durga and on sandal rosary beads chanted her 108 names, while she, the wife, she dreaded the coming days, singing lullaby to her never to be born Devi. Thank you.
Okay. And now, anyway, the one final thing about Neha, that average Indian mustache. I don't know. Maybe somebody will write poem about that one day. Anyway, so this is a Basically, before we leave, starting with Mr. Mukul, followed by Neha, finally Professor Nandini. So all of you mentioned, you expressed what poetry means to you. Why do you write poetry? Okay. So one is that whether when the poet writes the poem and the person who reads it, when it is a written word, or the poet recites the poem he or she composed, and the listener, okay, they're hearing this poem. One is that the poem being a part of literature reflects reality, whether inner reality, in case of fantasy poem, or outer, whatever, the existential, ontological questions are being addressed, or something, surroundings get reflected, a person's experience reflected. That's outer reality. And also, I mean, we have been probably for hundreds and hundreds of years, we all have been read, listened, and how poetry soothes the feeling of the people. Poetry heals. But above all these things, the poetry also ornaments, decorates our thoughts. It gives shape to our emotions, which are otherwise unwieldy. So, what poetry does, we'll start with Mr. Mukul Kumar, followed by Neha and Professor Nandini finally. Mr. Mukul Kumar.
Poetry, what I find the most remarkable feature of poetry is at the outset I had shared, like the element of, the spontaneity and the compulsion you feel, you undergo. That is why I think poetry is called the crown of literature, because, it is a magical process. You are gripped with certain emotions, and automatically, magically, you don't have to exert for it. Your emotions find thoughts, and thoughts words, and it is such a magical process for a poet to undergo. And as you rightly said, Mr. Rajmohan, that poetry has got a healing impact also. I think I can't recall the name of the philosopher or the poet who stated that poetry heals the wounds inflicted by reason. We are living in a world of rationality and reason, and poetry takes you all together into the different realm of emotions. And catharsis, again, I'm repeatedly reminded of this word, this catharsis, because your pains and sufferings ultimately become the source of the pleasure when they find some kind of poetic expression. So this is another plane at which I think poetry is quite distinct from the other genres. It steadily transforms not only pain into the pleasure, the sufferer into a poet. There are two transformations happening here. Like T.S. Eliot says, the man who suffers is different from the artist who creates. Here you can really feel it. You are suffering from the pain, and ultimately you are that pain is taking shape of some kind of creative expression, and that in turn becomes the source of the sublime pleasure. So poetry for me is a source of sublime pleasure, let me tell you, and it is just a very potent means to convert my own pain and sufferings into pleasure, and that is how I can negotiate life in a better manner.
Thank you. Poetry is a source of sublime pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Mukul. Ms. Neha?
I've never really thought of it that, what poetry does to me, but for me, poetry is the medium. It's one of my favorite, it's my favorite genre of literature has always been. For me, poetry is something very subtle. John Keats once said that, I think it was John Keats, I'm not sure, I don't remember, but he once said, if the poetry doesn't come to you as like leaves on a tree, then it better not come at all. So for me, again, like Sir said, that it is spontaneous, it cannot be cooked up, it has to come naturally. But at the same time, like the pangs of the childbirth, it is painful to produce a piece of work. It is painful because it contorts you from inside. It tells you that you have to squeeze out your emotion in a few words. It's succinct. It cannot be, like a novel where you can, let your imagination fly and you can write whatever you want to. So the brevity in the poetry is something that makes it the poem without really getting into the things which probably a fiction does. I'm sorry, I cannot explain what poetry means to me, but this is my favorite genre as far as the literature is concerned, and it was such a pleasure to listen to poetry. As you rightly said, Rajmohan ji, that it is, like we are so immersed in reading poetry and probably writing poetry that we don't listen to poetry. It was such a pleasure to listen to Nandini ma'am and Mukul sir, and your thoughts on Nagmohan sir, your thoughts on poetry. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Nandini?
Yeah, so likewise, it was such a pleasure listening to the two poets with whom I shared the day, and sir, your observations. Wonderful experience indeed. If you ask me why I write poetry, points. I have been a teacher since
Not
last
why
20
you,
years.
no, not you, why you write poetry, like what poetry does.
Okay, what poetry does to me, sir. I have been teaching since last 20 years. So as a poet and critic, in my poetry, you will always find the poet and critic together. Because in the classroom, I know what the students expect from poetry. And so that theoretical framework usually comes to my poetry. And when I teach in my classroom, my poetic sensibility also goes into my teaching. So poetry is a kind of emotional engagement to me. As another poet told just now, that it's an emotional overflow of powerful feelings, quoting Wordsworth. So in my poetry, usually you will find fables, fairy tales, mythology, and all the stories. I try to tell poetry in stories in the form of a verse, and I try to write witness literature. Nadine Gordimer, when she received the Nobel Prize, in her speech, she quoted a term. She created a term witness literature. In the court of law, the role of the witness is very important. The witness can actually change the complete case in the court of law. Similarly, a poet, a creative writer, should play the role of the witness in social change. So I try to do that witness literature to change me from inside, to make me a better human being by reading and writing poetry. And also, I try to go for a social change through my poetry. I try to contribute to social change through my poetry. So poetry for me is a serious engagement and also an emotional engagement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That whether it's a mythological poems or existential ones, and then the ones which reflect the person's experiences, I mean physical experiences and emotions involved, whatever it is. So what I gathered from is that poetry is a process of sublimation of one's experiences into something which is higher. That is why it affects the listener and reader. Thank you very much, Professor Nandini. Thank you very much, Mr. Mukul Kumar, Ms. Neha. Thank you very much for participating in today's program. And people from around the world, please continue to watch our programs in all the 24 languages. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Sahitya Academy. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.